Hello, this is Bonnie Gabowitz, host for Ward Talk. In Ward Talk, we discuss the challenges and solutions of the City of Ann Arbor with our council members from the 5 wards. Today, we have a new member since November, Lisa Disch from Ward 1. Welcome. I'm just so happy to meet you, especially since we don't have open meetings in person. It's so nice to see you on the screen.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Yes, and it's just a delight to have some new blood and some new opinions. Lisa, you are from Ward 1, you represent Ward 1, and if you could just tell us a little bit about what's happening with Ward 1 right now.
I'd be happy to. Yes, so Ward 1 is seeing a lot of development. We will be the Mishkan project with that great brownfield that's going to be converted into parks and restaurant and hotel and condos, all walkable to downtown. That is in Ward 1. That should be coming online soon, or the building should start because that was approved. Looks like we'll be seeing a new housing project going in at Duvarn and Pontiac in what's called the Brewers lot. That too is a brownfield. I think it will be, it has a landfill site there that is a little bit leaky. And so that will be cleaned up as part of the development of that. I think our ward feels that we've seen a little bit more than our fair share of new housing. And though many people think that that contributes to the traffic problems in our ward, I think that's actually a misperception. I think the biggest issue that we have in terms of traffic in Ward 1 is that we have a number of roads like Pontiac and Barton, for example, that were never, ever intended to be arterials. And now they're serving as arterials for commuters, because it's the M14 dumps right onto Barton, and people come in from the north and from 23 on Pontiac. And so we are just, it's very frustrating. We get a lot of speeding. In normal times when commutes are back up the way they are, people have a hard time even getting out of the housing developments when they have no exit but onto Pontiac. So I think that is a problem in my ward, and I have been pursuing various things to try to at least get us some stop signs and maybe get us some adjustments to that eastbound M14 exit, which was just on the council agenda a couple of meetings ago, due to the number of truck accidents that we have had at that site. So I think finally we're getting attention to some of these infrastructural issues that are really very difficult to solve, because like I say, these roads weren't designed for that, and there's no way to make them better. We're not going to take people's houses and widen the roads, and also widening the roads is the worst response you can have to traffic because you just get more. So some other things going on in our ward, we're looking toward the end of the Lower Town traffic study. And again, that's another thing that we hope is going to bring us some relief to the traffic that backs up on the Broadway Bridge during peak times. And we're also almost at the finish point of the Newport Creek drain study, which could give us some really good information about how our residents themselves can help us mitigate some of the effects of climate change. So the Newport Creek drain drains into the Huron River, and people that are on the downstream end of the Newport Creek drain are seeing flooding in their basements. And we're gonna, the Huron River is just being very much affected by climate change. These are the things that we will see in the Midwest. They will have much more to do with excess of water than they will do with heat and other things. So yeah.
This study is ongoing right now?
Yeah, it should be done in about July, and people should get some direction about, could they put in a rain garden? Should they dredge out their detention pond? Really kind of, should they put impermeable surface on their driveway if that's possible? Mm-hmm. Really some interesting ways that residents can get involved and be part of the response to this global national, international problem. So Yeah, so I'm sure that there are many other things that if my ward members were here, they would want me to raise, but I'll just toss those few things in and let us move. I know you want to talk about the bigger picture because this is your first, this is the first ward talk that you're having since we approved the budget. So
Yes, so let's get to the budget.
yeah,
I, I don't think people realize how involved it is unless they actually look at the information. It's quite overwhelming, actually. The budget being 470 million, according to the newspaper. That is a number that's really hard to understand.
right.
And I know the decisions are very serious and there's a lot of discussion. And in this particular meeting this week, there was not always a very strong agreement. Some votes were really split. So let's talk about the budget. Let's just start first with, I know that in the last few sessions I've had, there was discussion that through attrition, jobs would no longer be offered. And that was one way of saving money, is not replacing that position with another person. So in terms of cutting back positions, are there some positions that will definitely be cut, or is it all through attrition?
No, any cuts are through attrition. We are not making any personnel cuts. We did cut one job request, which was the Ann Arbor Police Department had requested funding for a civilian position, a chief strategy officer, to help with the planning and implementation of community policing in Ann Arbor. And our feeling was, or I guess different people had different thoughts about this, but I can speak for myself and say that I would be open to considering adding this position to the police department, but I would actually like to see a more detailed plan first of what community policing is going to look like and what this strategy officer would help with. And I think that before we can commit personnel to moving in a direction in AAPD, we need to have some reassurance about, community policing increases police presence in neighborhoods.
Mhm.
Ideally, that becomes a trust building and welcome thing. But if you're starting in a position of concern and lack of trust, I think we need to have more specificities about how that program is going to work so that it doesn't backfire.
So is this where the commission that deals with policing, is this where the major work will be done in studying how this can be pursued?
No, I don't think so. I think that where the major work of spelling out the details of community policing really has to come from the police chief and the police department itself.
Mhm.
And then that can be something that that ICPOC, our civilian oversight commission, can help to convene discussion and debate around this. Or maybe that should come, I'm surprised that we haven't had really, as a follow-up to everything that happened last summer, I'm surprised that we haven't had community conversations. And I think that in some ways the pandemic makes those difficult, but in other ways, we are finding that we get a lot of participation when we put meetings on Zoom.
Mhm.
So I would like to see, first of all, I think people need to see the details of the plan so that they can be reassured about some of the concerns that they have about it. And so it's simply, at a basic level, it's a communication issue, that we need more communication around this, and not communication in general terms, but communication of specificities. And so I would be very open to reactivating this position once we've seen more specificities and we've had an ability to communicate with our constituents about, look, this is not going to raise the number of traffic stops. It's not going to raise, searches and seizures that, just, oh, I happen to see, and now I'm going to go after you for. I do not think that that is the way community policing works. Actually, I honestly do not, but we haven't really seen enough details about the program to make it clear that residents don't need to worry about that. So, yeah.
And in terms of the budget, you have decided to not spend money on the deer cull. And I know this was not a unanimous decision. Was that basically because there's really not enough money to go around, or was it that the deer cull wasn't necessary?
So the deer cull is really controversial.
I know.
And the allocation for the deer cull this time around was going to be $120,000, which is not large. And compared to earlier allocations for the deer cull, this is starting to look more like a maintenance funding level. And so we did not fund the cull last year. And so this would be 2 years without culling. And some people feel that 2 years without culling isn't really something that we need to feel urgent about, some urgency about.
But let me ask you this, was there any deer count done in the past year to help make that decision?
Well, so counts are one thing, but I think the stronger evidence that we have for the need for culling is deer browse studies. And so that's where Jacqueline Courteau has been employed by the city. She's also employed by University of Michigan. So she continues to do this work to put essentially fencing around valued ecological resources in our woodlands that exclude the deer, but not other mammals or, eaters, diners, shall we say, from these resources. And she can compare for example, the health of oak seedlings that have been fenced, the health of trillium, the health of various wildflowers that have been fenced to those that have not been fenced. And
Lisa, let me just interrupt you. This sounds like we need to discuss it in a little bit more detail, but we do have to take a break.
Okay.
Would you believe half the show's already over? So
I do not believe that.
When we come back, I do want to hear more about what needs to be considered with deer cull. Great.
Yep.
This is Bonnie Gabowitz. We're going to take a short break. You are welcome to send comments or questions at ctn@a2gov.org. Also, you can see us on Twitter at twitter.com/CTN in Arbor. We'll be right back. This is Bonnie Gabowitz for Ward Talk. I'm talking with Lisa Disch from Ward 1. We've just been talking about the budget and the deer cull. We didn't quite finish, so let's finish up with some of the things that have been studied, that the information you need in order to know what's going on with the number of deer, or what determines whether there's an overrun of deer.
Right, exactly, right. Yep, that's the question you were asking before, is how do we know we have a problem? And the deer browse studies that are being done do show us that the health and regeneration of things like oak seedlings, wildflowers, trillium. All of these things are incredibly important because, of course, they feed pollinators. And as we all know, we are reaching a crisis with pollinators. All these things are interconnected. And so those are indicators that they're better indicators than counts of deer square mile that we do have a problem. The evidence is clear but modest that culling has had an effect on forest regeneration. So I think that where people sort of fell was, is it urgent? You know, can we afford another year off of culling? And is this evidence really strong enough to show that we're meeting this really important ecological goal by culling? Because for me, that's the compelling goal. I think the culling debate is not well framed when we have selfish people who love their gardens versus humane people who love animals. I think it's an ecosystem issue. And so I supported funding the cull, but I also felt that reasonable people could disagree, and indeed they did. And we ended up carving up the deer cull money, really fighting over scraps when you consider, as you said, the overall size of the budget. But we ended up carving up the deer cull money, and we put $40,000 towards helping to fund the creation of a strategic plan and a site plan, a preliminary site plan for the center of the city project. And so the city is helping out with that project and hoping that the creation of such a plan will stimulate private donors to step up, because that's always been the assumption around that project.
Right.
And another great.
Just to comment about that, just for our viewers to know, especially our new residents, is this is a project that's been going on for a few years now, is trying to make that space a community space, a viable space. And it's kind of dragged its heels. It's not much is happening. So putting some money into this is definitely a step forward in getting it going.
Yeah, I don't know that I'd say that the project has dragged its heels. I mean, I think the Center of the City Task Force finished its work about a year ago, and then the Center of the City Commission was set up, and they were trying to raise funds, and so now we're, yeah.
So let's just say the wheels go slowly.
The wheels on everything, and then there are wheels inside wheels. So and then the other thing that we're doing with the a little bit of the deer, of what had been allocated for the deer cull but is now just general fund money, is we will be hiring a diversity, equity, inclusion officer for the city of Ann Arbor. The county has one, the university has one. It is important that we have one. This is not the same as a human resource manager. This is really a position that's looking strategically at how the city can become more diverse, more welcoming, improve the climate where that is necessary. We are very excited to do that work, and I shared that priority too. So that's where we are. So I know that you had a question about short-term rentals. So I'd like to ask what you had wanted to talk about that.
Well, I think there's some confusion. Sometimes when we hear bits and pieces of news, we don't get the whole picture. And from what I understand, there was an effort to have control over the rentals and open up more real estate. And yet there are many people who have bought homes to make into the short-term rentals who are now saying we want to continue to have the short-term rentals. And it's complicated because it's not that the city's saying no one can have any short-term rentals. I think if you could clarify based on what the latest voting has been, where you're at with allowing short-term rentals that now exist or might exist in the future.
Yeah, okay. So essentially what happened was in September, the previous council took a vote, which would have banned any short-term rentals in residential zones of the city. And then even at the time that they took that, they realized that that decision might need to be tweaked, because there had been people who, before the city made a distinction between short-term and long-term rental, these were people who had licensed and inspected rental properties that they were using as short-term rentals,
So,
which was
so they were all following the rules as
they were
as
following
presented.
the rules, right? And what has happened is that, you know, Ann Arbor, like many other municipalities, is realizing that, you know, we didn't imagine this thing called short-term rentals, and we want to get ahead of it in Ann Arbor before too much of our housing goes to it, because when you get an abundance of short-term rentals in your residential neighborhoods, or even, you know, even just in rental zones, rents can go up, housing prices can go up. So we wanted to get ahead of it, but we didn't want to make a rules change in the middle of the game that affects long-term investments that people have had in their property. And so we modified the vote that the earlier council took. And really the only way to modify that vote was to write into our zoning code this distinction between short-term and long-term rentals, to recognize those short-term rentals that had been operating in residential zones. And that form of short-term rental, which is not owner-occupied, that is in a residential zone, is no longer legal. So going forward, from March 1st going forward, those are not legal. But those who had been following the rules earlier, they are legal non-conforming uses.
Mhm.
We did not create those STRs, nor did we create a category of legal non-conforming use. We recognized that they are a legal non-conforming use. So they're non-conforming because we created this new distinction and we've prohibited it from from residential zones.
So let me ask you this: what is the definition of short-term rentals? Are we talking like less than 30 days?
30 days. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, so essentially going forward, there will be, in residential zones, no more non-owner occupied short-term rentals. You can still operate, you can still rent out a bedroom in your house as a short-term rental. You can still leave your house for the weekend and rent it out to someone who wants to come in and watch a football game. Mm-hmm. Those things are called homestay and whole house rental. And those are available to people who occupy their home as a private, as a principal residence. But it is no longer available to have a non-owner occupied, to have new non-owner occupied STRs in residential zones. STRs are permitted in mixed use zones, whether they are owner occupied or not. We preserve that. If you have rented an apartment or a house to a tenant and the lease does not restrict it, your tenant could do a homestay or a whole house rental. They cannot start using your rental as a non-owner occupied, because again, we don't allow new ones of those to be created. So it's really just, I know that people felt as though we had made this big victory by banning them from residential zones. And now we've walked back on that. But what we're doing is the legal thing. And these zoning designations run with the property. So this means even when these STRs that have been recognized are sold, mm-hmm. that permission stays. So it is confusing.
Yeah. So, and are you getting, I know it's only been a few days since the last meeting, but have you gotten any feedback from your neighbors as to how they feel about it? Do they think the council's taking a step in the right direction in general?
In general, or with the budget?
About the short-term rentals.
The short-term rentals we voted on a while ago. So I think I heard a lot of concern over we want the overall number of these STRs that are in residential neighborhoods to decrease. And so we want you to take this permission away when it changes hands, but legally we can't do that. Mm-hmm. So they want something that has just never been a zoning practice. Mm-hmm. And there was no other way to respect the property rights of the people who had established these and were operating legally under a system that didn't make a distinction between short-term and long-term rentals. And so this often happens, and this was true of me when I wasn't legislating and hearing from staff on the complexities of things. People want something that's not possible. They see it as a simple and obvious solution, but in fact, it is completely at odds with zoning law or property rights or something else. And so what we've done is we've jumped in at a moment where there are right now, it looks like maybe about 140 of these. That's a relatively low number. So we jumped in before it really got out of control, and we've done the best we can to tamp this down in a way that's consistent with our commitments to housing affordability.
So, okay, so you're pretty much done with deciding about short-term rentals.
That's done.
That's done.
Mhm.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
And I did have a quick question, and this is because I don't know everything. When I was looking at information about the budget, basically through online newspapers, the statement was that there's still a $2.1 million structural
Mhm.
deficit in the general fund. I don't know what that means. Structural deficit in the general fund. Do you have any idea what that means?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to explain it is that because there has been a decrease in the sales tax revenue that we get back and in the parking revenues because of COVID, our revenues that that normally fund the general fund fall short of the expenses that we have. Most of the expenses in the general fund are committed. We don't have a lot of discretionary money in the general fund. And that's why we end up fighting over what seems like ludicrous amounts, like $120,000, because much of the general fund is already committed. And so with all those commitments, the drop in revenue that we experienced due to the things that we lost because of COVID, like nobody was buying things and nobody was parking, we have a shortfall, and it's a shortfall in things that we are automatically committed to funding. And so this year we are able to make up the difference because we have a healthy savings balance in our general fund. Mm-hmm. We're able to dip into our savings, and we're able to put off a couple of things that we are not required to do, but we were doing as a best practice. And we're going to be able to make that up. But next year, it's going to be tougher because there's only so far that we can dip into our savings. And so I think we are hoping that some of the federal rescue money that we get, we can use for some one-time expenditures, because you can't use, this is one-time money. You can't use that to fill a structural deficit because that's a recurring deficit. But we might be able to do some one-time expenditures and take a little bit of the pressure off our general fund. But we're going to be seeing cuts in services, unfortunately, unless the economy comes back much quicker than we anticipate.
Well, and on a positive note, this being the month of May, it looks like the summer and fall, we might start having more businesses open, more people mm-hmm. coming to downtown. Yeah. It's a little more revenue. So maybe, you know, we've hit the lowest point and now we're on our way up. So we yes. can start, you know, getting some of that revenue back.
Yes, yeah. Completely.
Well, I want to thank you so much for this introductory session we've had. I appreciate your time, and I look forward to hearing more about your positions and how you're involved with the city. Thank you so much for your service.
Thank you, Bonnie, for this opportunity, and it's lovely to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too. This is Bonnie Gabowitz for Ward Talk. Thank you for joining us. And we'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to email us at ctn@a2gov.org. You can also follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/CTN in Arbor. Thanks for joining us. I'll see you next time.